I spent 4 years talking to my children about my future. 4 years of conversations about care homes, about helpers, about what would happen when I couldn't manage anymore. And in all of those 4 years, not one single person ever stopped and asked me the question that actually mattered. Not once. What do you want, Margaret? What would make you feel alive? My name is Margaret. I am 81 years old. And what I am about to share with you today is something I wish someone had told me the morning after my husband Harold passed away. Because I made mistakes. Painful, expensive, humiliating mistakes. And I carried the weight of those mistakes alone, in silence, the way my generation was taught to carry everything. So if you are sitting where I once sat, or if you love someone who is, please keep listening. This might be the most important thing you hear all year. When Harold died, something strange happened in my family. Within days, everyone had an opinion. My son Peter called from Edinburgh. My daughter Anne drove up from Bristol. And they sat in my kitchen, the kitchen where Harold and I had made breakfast together for 37 years, and they talked. They talked about me as though I were a problem that needed solving. A leaking roof. A broken boiler. Something that needed to be fixed before winter came. Peter was the one who said it. "Mum, you cannot stay here alone. You will come and live with us." And I said yes. I said yes because I had not slept properly in 6 weeks. I said yes because grief does something terrible to your ability to resist. It hollows you out like an old tree trunk and fills the empty space with fog. So I packed 2 suitcases, left the house where I had lived for 34 years, and moved into my son's home in Edinburgh. I want to be very careful here, because Peter's wife, Caroline, is a genuinely good woman. I mean that with my whole heart. But I learned very quickly that there is an enormous difference between a good person and a person you can share a home with. Those are 2 completely separate things, and nobody warns you about that distinction. Their house was beautiful. Open plan, all glass and pale wood, the kind of home you see in magazines. But it did not feel like a home to me. It felt like a museum I was not qualified to work in. I did not know where anything was. I would open drawers looking for a tea towel and find charging cables. I would look for the sugar and find protein powder. Every small confusion reminded me that I was a guest. A permanent, inconvenient guest. I started to notice things. The way Caroline would quietly rearrange the dishwasher after I had loaded it, saying nothing, just silently correcting me. The way Peter's face would tighten when I turned on the television during dinner, which was simply what Harold and I had always done. These were not cruel people. They were not trying to make me feel small. But I felt smaller every single day. Then came the afternoon that changed everything. I was standing on the back porch getting some fresh air on a cold October day. The kitchen window was slightly open. And I heard Caroline on the phone. I was not trying to listen. I want to be very clear about that. But the words reached me anyway. She said, "He never switches off anymore. The moment he walks through the door, there is always something. His mother hasn't eaten, his mother felt dizzy, his mother was crying this afternoon. I love her, I honestly do. But this was not what we planned." I stood there in the cold with the wind at my collar and those words settled over me like frost. This was not what we planned. In 7 words, I understood exactly what I was. I was the thing that had interrupted their real life. I was the unexpected chapter that did not belong in the story they had written for themselves. That night I lay in the spare bedroom that smelled of fresh paint and clean linen, staring at a ceiling I did not recognize, and I made a decision. I was going home. Peter argued, of course. Every objection you can imagine. What if you fall? What if you get sick in the night? What if? What if? There was no end to the what ifs. But nobody asked the question on the other side. What if she stays somewhere that is slowly erasing her? What if she spends her remaining years feeling like a burden? Nobody asked that. I walked back through my own front door on a Tuesday morning and I felt 2 things at exactly the same time. I felt relief so deep it was almost physical, like putting down something very heavy you have been carrying for months. And I felt afraid. Because the house was quiet in a way it had never been quiet before. Harold's silence was different from absence. His silence had been warm. This silence was cold and wide, and it had edges. Peter arranged for a carer to come. Her name was Dorothy, and she was 63 years old with large capable hands and a no-nonsense manner that I respected immediately. I told her on the first day, "This is my home and I am in charge." She nodded and said, "Absolutely, you are in charge and I am here to help." And for several months, that arrangement worked beautifully. Dorothy came 4 mornings a week. She helped with the shopping, accompanied me to appointments, kept an eye on things without suffocating me. I had my space. I had my routines. I had someone watching over me without watching me. But then the numbers caught up with me. My pension was just over £900 a month. Dorothy cost £650. Then there were medications, heating bills, food, the small repairs a house always needs. I had some savings from when Harold and I had sold the car and taken one last holiday together, but I watched those savings disappear month by month like sand through an open fist. I sat down one evening with a pen and paper and worked out the arithmetic clearly for the first time, and my stomach dropped. At this rate, in less than 3 years, I would have nothing left. I would be entirely dependent on my children for every penny. That thought terrified me more than almost anything else. I had to let Dorothy go. She was wonderful about it. We hugged at the door on her last day and both of us had tears in our eyes, not the sharp tears of sadness exactly, but the tired tears that come when life makes things complicated without asking your permission. After that, Peter pushed harder about the care home he had been researching. He took me to visit it on a bright Thursday morning and I could see immediately how much hope he had invested in the place. It was clean and well-staffed and the staff smiled warmly at the entrance. There were flowers on every table in the dining room. Peter showed me around with the expression of a man who has been worrying for a long time and can finally see a solution. I stayed for 1 week. The room was fine. The food was adequate. The staff were kind. But from the first morning, I was handed a schedule. Breakfast at 8:30. Lunch at 2. Activities throughout the day, craft sessions on Tuesday, music therapy on Thursday, bingo on Friday evening. Bingo. I am a woman who spent decades reading poetry. I have stood in my kitchen reciting lines from memory just for the pleasure of the sounds. And the pinnacle of my week was going to be bingo. I do not say that to be unkind to people for whom that is a comfort. I truly do not. But it was not what I needed. I could still think. I could still choose. I could still decide what I wanted my afternoon to look like. And in that place, nobody asked what you wanted. You were presented with the day's menu and you selected from what was available. That is not living. That is existing inside a very well-managed waiting room. On the 3rd afternoon, I sat in the communal lounge and looked around at the other residents. The television was on but nobody was watching it. One woman was knitting. One man was asleep in his armchair with his chin on his chest. And I realized what I was seeing. Everyone in that room was waiting. Not waiting for anything specific. Just waiting in the general direction of the future, as though life had already finished but the paperwork had not yet come through. I telephoned Peter that same evening and told him I was leaving. He was quiet for a long time. Then he asked what I was going to do instead. And I gave him the only honest answer I had. I said, "I do not know yet. But I am going to find it." I went home. And for several days I simply sat and watched my street from the window. I have lived in this neighborhood for over 40 years. I know which bakery opens first in the morning. I know which elderly gentleman walks his beagle at 7:15 every day without fail. I know the sound the church bells make when the wind is blowing from the east. This street is woven into me the way very few things are. One morning I saw my neighbor, Gloria. She is 74 and has lived on this road even longer than I have. I had always said hello, the polite greeting of neighbors who have never quite found the time for real conversation. But that morning she was standing at her gate struggling with her shopping bags, her keys lost somewhere in her coat pocket. I put my shoes on and went downstairs. "Can I help with those?" She looked up, surprised, and smiled. We ended up talking for 20 minutes on the pavement with the bags sitting at our feet. She told me her son lived abroad and she rarely saw him. She told me her hip was getting worse and the shopping was becoming more difficult. She told me the days felt long. I told her I understood completely. That conversation was the beginning of something I did not have a name for. We started shopping together twice a week. I carry the trolley because the bags are too heavy for my hands now. She knows the market better than I do and finds the best prices on everything. We walk slowly and talk the whole way. She knows stories about this neighborhood that I never knew, and I make her laugh with stories about my children when they were small. Then there was James, the young father on the ground floor. 2 small children, both parents working, family living far away, permanently exhausted. I met him one morning in the hallway looking like he had not slept in 3 days. I asked if he was all right. He told me about the week they had been having. I looked at him and said, "If you ever need someone to sit with the children for an afternoon, my door is open." He stared at me as though I had offered him something impossible. He took me up on it. And now, 2 or 3 times a month, I go downstairs and spend the afternoon with his children while he and his wife have a few hours to themselves. His youngest, a 4-year-old named Thomas, brings me his drawings to examine. He explains each one with tremendous seriousness. "This is a dragon, Margaret," he says, pointing carefully. He breathes fire here. "Do you see?" "I see," I tell him. "I see everything. And I mean it with my whole heart." James fixed the blind in my bedroom that had been broken for months. His wife Ellen has accompanied me to hospital appointments when I did not want to face them alone. Gloria calls me before she goes to the pharmacy so I can avoid the long queues. The young man upstairs who works in technology came down one afternoon without being asked and spent an hour setting up my new telephone properly. Small things. But small things are the architecture of a life. They are the bricks that hold everything upright. I have not solved everything. I want to be honest about that. There are mornings when my knees make the stairs feel like a mountain. There are nights when the silence in this flat is so complete that I reach for Harold in the dark and find only air, and the grief comes back as sharp and fresh as the very first time. There are days when I wonder how much longer I can manage, when the question of the future presses against the window like bad weather. But that day has not arrived yet. And until it does, I intend to be here. In my home. In my neighborhood. Among the people who know me, even partially. Giving what I can. Accepting what I need. Living rather than waiting. Here is what I wish someone had told me on the morning Harold died. You are not choosing between becoming a burden to your family and disappearing into a care home. Those are not your only 2 options. There is a third way, and it has no brochure and no contract, and you cannot find it online. It is made of ordinary moments and unlikely friendships and the willingness to say, out loud, that you need something, or that you have something to give. That last part is the hardest. My generation was raised on silence and self-sufficiency. We were taught that asking for help was weakness, that keeping to yourself was dignity, that the brave thing was to manage alone. Harold never asked for anything. Not once in his life. And he carried so much inside him that never found its way out. I sometimes wonder what those last years would have looked like if he had let people in a little closer. I am learning, at 81 years old, that the bravest thing is not silence. The bravest thing is speaking. Asking. Letting someone close enough to actually help. Dignity is not doing everything alone. Dignity is knowing when you need company and having the courage to seek it. Aurelio's chair is still in the corner of my sitting room. I will never move it. But this afternoon, when Gloria comes for coffee as she does every Wednesday now, I will put another chair beside it. And we will sit together and talk about our children and our ailments and the things we never quite managed to do and the things we still can. And at 81 years old, in a quiet flat on a street I have known for 40 years, that is enough. That is everything. If someone in your life is sitting alone with these questions right now, sit down beside them. Tell them what you just heard. Not because I have all the answers, but because sometimes all a person needs to know is that there is another way forward. That the story is not finished. That life, even when it aches, even when the house is quiet, even when you reach for someone who is no longer there, still has pages left to be written.